Folks, welcome to Compass Coffee Talk.
Oh, we're live.
Special
Wonderful
guest. We are live, Errol.
It's live radio.
Thanks, guys. Well,
Technical
figured it
difficulties
out.
and all, we're just going to give you
only going to get better from here. So
all
That's
natural, certified organic humans.
it's like when you find a bug in your lettuce, it's natural.
Nice.
Errol, we're glad to have you. Thank you. All things have worked out. And thanks for joining Compass Coffee Talk. We have a
my
bunch
pleasure
of
to be here. Yeah, I'm
Thank
so
you so
glad
much.
that you guys are doing this and just love what you guys are about and have tuned into a bunch of the other episodes as an audience member. So just appreciate all the good energy that you guys are always putting out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. I just want to thank, and this is ironic for you probably, but Allegro Coffee Company is a sponsor of Compass Coffee Talk. We actually have a big kind of giveaway today that's a little bit special for our participants, so Bill will handle that at the end. But the full circle of things, I think, is kind of the way things are meant to be as well. So we welcome Errol. I want to
for Allegro over the years, so just want to give a shout out to some of my friends and colleagues from Allegro. Some good people over there.
Good. They're great people, cool. And I will tell you, they've really been committed to quality coffee. And a lot of the things they do, I've learned a lot about what they're doing in Rwanda with the collectives and education and the farmers there. So, there's a whole story there, but that's another story. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Bill Capsalis. Bill, just hope you will say hello to everybody and get us going.
Yeah, hey, welcome again to another episode of Compass Coffee Talk, our last one for the year. We have some huge announcements for our first quarter, which we'll save for a little bit here for some guests coming up. But without further ado, we're really happy to welcome Errol to the show. And Errol, I'll get us started off with just a real easy lob question here. Like, why the natural products industry? What drew you into it, man?
Yeah, it started in college. I went to State University and had been flipping burgers and making sandwiches for a couple of years to pay room and board. And, on the other hand, I was a biology major. I was an EMT volunteering. So it's like this convergence of food and health were, top of mind for me. And there happened to be a volunteer run food co-op on campus, and I was really drawn to it. I was also in a bit of a counterculture phase. I was a hardcore punk, upstate New York City hardcore. So if you're around in the 90s, you would know. Just so the music was very much, a cultural force. And I came to food through music, and me and a couple of the other friends of mine, were vegan at the time. Vegan in the 90s was not easy or pleasant, but we were really committed. So I lived essentially on Amy's organic burritos and Eden soy milk, and helped out at the co-op for about 3 or 4 years when I was in school, in addition to my, paying the bills job and, volunteer work, as well as my full course load. When I got out of school, I kind of did food stuff on the side. I was full-time community organizer. I worked for a number of organizations around drug law reform and environmental justice organizing. And I worked at farmers markets and did CSAs. I worked some retail and food service, you name it. Eventually ended up at Whole Foods. And I was at Whole Foods for, 14 years. Started out as a stock clerk and overnight crew, and just took advantage of the company's growth and opportunities and moved up and around. Eventually landed on the global team after running the Northeast region for a bit, and the grocery department. And I was on the national grocery team for 7 years and had that full responsibility. And by the time I left, we had grown it to about $5 billion in annual sales and added a whole bunch of margin and launched thousands of items. So yeah, it kind of was accidental. Definitely wasn't intentional. And I'm pretty sure that most folks who had been aware of me working grocery in my mid-20s were like, what is he thinking? So,
well, you're the 14-year overnight success.
No such thing as an overnight success. Yeah, it was a lot of 70-hour work weeks and overnight inventory shifts. And, anybody who's worked retail knows the deal.
Retail is hard work, a lot of hours.
Yeah, no, it's like my first year at Whole Foods, like my assistant manager, I want to give a shout out to Howard Schwartz from the Florida region, just a good human being. He pulled me aside. He said, you know why we're here, Errol? We're here to feed the world. We're here to feed the people. We're feeding them good food, something like that. Like, and he meant it. And he looked at me so seriously. It just like, oh, wow, this man's a zealot in a good way. Because, you know, I wasn't sure if they took it seriously. You know, I'm always been a skeptical person. And I just, throughout all my years at Whole Foods, had always met so many folks who were like fully committed to doing that. So
well, we can see today, you know, that a healthy people is actually essential to economic security, national security, public health. Interestingly enough, you know, the message of the health food industry for years has been about boosting and optimizing your health, trying to avoid preconditions. Those things are actually all coming to a bit of a head today. And it seems to me, to bring that around, now the natural products industry is like essential workers, front line of all of this. What have you been seeing in that?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it's sort of three-pronged. You know, you've got the ability of folks to make personal choices, and it's, you know, very much determination of their income, you know, their background, their education. On the other hand, you've got a lot more folks working on policy to enable greater access outside of the marketplace to folks. So projects like the Good Food Purchasing Program from the Center for Good Food Purchasing, or the Real Meals campaign, looking at institutional public contracts so that folks who may not be able to afford or be located near, or just be frankly alienated by, you know, the culture of natural and organic foods. It could sometimes be a lot for folks to stomach. It's its own thing. We've developed a sort of insular culture in the organic food industry, and it's not always been as inclusive as I think it could be if you just look at the leadership and the ownership of most companies. And so looking at it from, you know, multifaceted angle, you've got policy that folks are doing to make sure that everybody has access to this stuff. And, you know, I think the industry itself has made significant improvements in scale so that there's a lot more of it than there used to be. We've grown significantly, 30% in organic produce sales growth in just the last couple of years. We've seen huge growth in the overall organic sector, huge growth in this non-GMO sector that we created to carve out, you know, seed sovereignty away from the big multinational seed companies. And we've made sure that, you know, the quality has more or less stayed pretty high. I think there's been some unfortunate compromises in organics, such as the inclusion of hydroponic or the lack of enforcement around sunset provisions. And, you know, I put that more on the National Organic Standards Board. I do feel overall the acreage growth and, you know, the popularity of organic for me is the gold standard of American agriculture and American food system. In a lot of ways, pointing the way forward for a lot of the food system, you know, internationally as well, as many of these standards are accepted, you know, across international boundaries. So I think we've got a long way to go when we look at the equity and access. I think we've made a lot of progress from, you know, 25 years ago when I started. People thought I was a freak. I mean, I probably still am a freak, but like at least I've been accepted as a freak. And now organic is everywhere. You know, organic has, you know, well over, you know, 50% household penetration. Almost every household in America probably has something organic in their pantry or in their diet. It's the same thing with non-GMO. So, I mean, that's huge progress, but, you know, we can't pat ourselves on the back when there's 25,000 people lined up at the Dallas Food Bank over the weekend due to the COVID crisis. So, I mean, you know, let's enter that conversation with a bit of gravity and humility in terms of, you know, the overall macroeconomic problems, in addition to, you know, personal choices around health.
Yeah. You know, we have a lot of different people registered for the coffee talk this morning, Errol, and some of them are with brands, and I'd love to just hear your thoughts on like the state of things today and, you know, things like sampling and new product introductions and stuff. What's your sort of take on how brands can, you know, go forward in 2021?
Yeah, it's tough. It's so funny because I work 50-50 between a number of retailers and a number of brands, and the brands are all doing well, but it's all white knuckle. You know, it's, you know, the cash flow, folks doing fundraising, you know, some SKU rationalization, but in a lot of it's been made up by growth elsewhere. So it is the weirdest, toughest market that any of us have experienced. And really, anything that happened before March of 2020 no longer matters. That world is gone. You know, the cheap money, you know, high growth, you know, it's like we have a new reality here. Sampling as we know it is gone, at least for the next 1.5 to 2 years, in terms of folks' ability to have personal interactions in store with any level of safety, as we don't really understand how long this virus is going to stick around, you know, how long it's going to continue to rage through the population, and, you know, whether or not there's a vaccine, how effective it'll be, and how easily distributed it'll be as well, and what side effects. So I think for brands that are doing this in this marketplace, direct to consumer is super important. And then nailing down a few key retail partnerships. It's like, you don't have to be everything to everyone. You know, do you want to go narrow and deep in terms of being in 1 or 2 metro areas, like your home market, and just going for density, you know, working with some DSDs? If you do have national placement, do you have a secure relationship with the category manager and the decision maker at those stores? Because it's dicey now. Folks are continuing to keep the blade sharp in terms of ratcheting back on you know, SKU rationalization and assortment. You know, what's your promotions plan? You know, how tight are you with the distributor? It's just, everything needs to be continually re-examined almost on a monthly basis, because forecasting models are out the window. There's really no assurance of where the marketplace is going to go when you've got 40% unemployment in this country. You know, just there's not a lot of you know, income or wealth being generated, except you're at the very top. You know, as a brand, one thing you may want to support is a second stimulus package, a universal basic income, and anything to just get, you know, money flowing through the economy to make sure that folks are able to buy product. You may want to support policies that just say, hey, everybody stay home for a little while. How about that? And maybe we should bail out bars and restaurants so they're not open, because we know they need to make a living, and we don't want all these bars and restaurants to go out of business and get taken over by TGI Fridays, right? Well, maybe we should just pay everybody to just stay closed until the storm passes, because we are in an unprecedented crisis. So it's beyond just like whether or not. Oh, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
No, our Governor Polis actually just called a special session to do a state stimulus exactly about what you're saying, to help the bars and the restaurants, because we don't want to lose them, and we're seeing is dithering on the federal level.
Well, it's nice to have all that cannabis revenue in Colorado, and if only all the other states, like, you know, just give a shout out to my old neighbors in New Jersey. New Jersey is now officially as cool as New York because they've legalized cannabis, and they'll be able to do that sort of stuff too with all that incoming revenue. I'm just saying.
I'm a Jersey boy too. That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, Texas soon, you know, it's coming.
Yeah,
there was another 5 states actually, you know, in the elections. That was one of the very few bipartisan support issues, in that 5 additional states and a couple of
when
red
you look at how
states
people voted
cannabis.
versus when you look at what people voted for versus who they voted for, it's like 2 different countries.
Yeah, no kidding.
70% of people on a Fox poll say they want state-sponsored healthcare, aka Medicare for all, right? You've got all these states passing, you know, legalization. And then you've got the Uber Lyft crowd literally spend $200 million to buy Prop 22 in California, which is probably the worst thing to have happened for gig workers, in my humble opinion, in terms of job security and healthcare and benefits. So it's you know, it's a wild election season. I for one, am glad it's over, and I'm not looking forward to the next one. But I'm also appreciative of some of these changes that folks have made, particularly around cannabis reform. Something I've been working on, I mean, for 25 years, since I read the insert of Cypress Hill CD when I was in college. So it's good.
There's a lot going on in Texas, especially in hemp. So Hemp's, if we can be a resource to you in that way. As a matter of fact, Texas is looking to be a big hemp fiber producer.
Yeah, I mean, Texas
beyond CBD.
Lead.
Yeah, beyond CBD and all the other uses of the plant.
There's only so much CBD we could pump into the marketplace, you know, as if the price hasn't already crashed. But yeah, in terms of fiber, in terms of hemp concrete, I'm not directly involved, so I don't want to speak for the folks, but I did give testimony to the Texas, I think it was Texas legislature several years ago when I was at Whole Foods in support of legalization of hemp. in Texas. It's just such a common sense thing. Just like with energy policy in Texas, Texas should be a leader and is continuing to be a leader, but even more so in wind and solar, and in terms of a just transition away from all the oil and gas that it's been known for. And likewise, Texas should be a leader in hemp and, alternate fibers and, alternate industry that, the hemp industry can really create just based on, how useful hemp is. Yeah. So I'm right there with you guys.
Hey, I want to go back to this question about brands, but then flip the coin on you.
Sorry about that, guys.
That's okay.
Oh no, it's all conversation, man.
It's all good. It's all good, but I'm curious about the retailer front then. So you have 1 foot in retail, 1 foot in brands, the work you're doing today, and want to learn a little bit more about your podcast for sure. But you see anything changing on the retail front in terms of consolidation or changes in terms of curbside pickup, things like that?
Well, yeah.
Let me add one question to that as well.
Yeah.
What I've been seeing is people opening stores. Although, again, other things are saying brick and mortar versus online. So we do want to hear from you on this.
Yeah. I mean, one example is Earth Fare, who went through a Chapter 7 liquidation, now has opened, I think, 14 stores in their original area with a different philosophy and feel, different leadership. So I wish those folks the best of luck. But in terms of overall retail, I continue to see a lot more disruption. Everybody's having to compete downhill on price, not just with Grocery Outlet and Dollar General, Lidl and Aldi, but now it's everybody's waiting to see what Amazon does with all their new store formats. Walmart is such a presence. You have to keep Walmart in mind. Yet the reduction in price always means that there is some reduction in either quality or somebody in the supply chain is getting screwed over. So a lot of retailers who are, thinking of, hey, we want to maintain, the organic and natural products ethics, fair labor, fair trade, are having to keep in mind their ability to retail stuff at their gross margin to stay operating, as well as to not grind down suppliers on price to the point where, nobody's making any money in the supply chain anymore. So I think it's an institutional crisis in the food industry, the race to the bottom on price, and there's only a few people who will win. Those are usually the shareholders, the owners of the biggest companies, and look at how many billions of dollars in profit, have been generated, Walmart and Amazon. And that's not gone to everybody in the supply chain. We have major issues with trafficking, with forced labor in this country, with farm workers. Truck driving is essentially debt peonage these days for many folks. It's not the great middle class job that it used to be. And we have to consider that. So as a retailer, back to your point, know your customers, and service your customers as best you can. Definitely curbside, white label, moving, as much as you can be independent from Instacart. Instacart is such an extractive model. I helped roll out Instacart at Whole Foods. And a lot of the issues that we pointed out when Instacart started, they capture the data, their separate line of promotions, their interface directly with the consumer in a different manner culturally than you as a retailer would have, how they pay and set up benefits and treat, their employees, their gig workers. Obviously, they were a big sponsor of Prop 22. It's highly problematic. And, these are things that we talked about 6-7 years ago that are now like, everybody has to deal with this. So, white label or curbside, alternate means of delivery. But then also in terms of what you're doing as a retailer, yes, some SKU rationalization, making sure that you have what folks are looking for, that you're reorienting the merchandising, that you're rescheduling your category reviews to optimize, those categories that are growing in the pandemic, knowing that we've probably got another 6 or 9 months easily. I have some friends saying that we're maybe early 2022 in terms of when we get back to some sense of normalcy, that you're adjusting on the fly, and that you're creating some level of rolling forecasts, that you're watching the numbers since March, and that you're a lot more sensitive to the comps year over year, especially when we get into the February, March, pantry hoarding timeframe. A lot of folks are going to be very disappointed if they can't necessarily make those comps in that timeframe like they would usually, because of just the sheer panic buying from last year. So it's definitely unprecedented. And finally, it should be understood by everybody. It's just watching the cash flow from week to week, watching the open to buy in terms of your purchase orders, how much inventory you're bringing in, making sure that you're prioritizing those trends and attributes like organic, which has grown significantly throughout the pandemic. And it was the same thing during the recession in 2008, 9, 10, 11. When I was at Whole Foods National, organic grew consistently. Products labeled fair trade, fair labor grew consistently. And that's because those customers, if they have a penny to their name, are going to continue to buy that stuff,
Because it's the
committed.
organic apple a day that keeps the doctor away today.
Yeah, I mean, organic metadata has shown that they're more nutrient dense. There's obviously less pesticides. You switch over organic for a week and you get all that glyphosate crap out of your body.
Right.
Glyphosate, obviously, involved in lawsuits around cancer, et cetera. So yeah, there's so many positives to it, and those are the customers in our sector of the trade that we have to service, we have to stay loyal to, and not disappoint. And then also, local supply chains, both simplifying supply chains and creating redundancy around product categories. And that's what you've seen, such as National Co-op Grocers creating a secondary national relationship with KeHE. I think Infra has created a national secondary relationship around UNFI. Even Amazon's got in the game with a 16% stake in Spartan Nash, right?
Have you seen companies that have extended supply chains, talking about supply chain, how the pandemic may have impacted them at all and how they've pivoted? Anybody that you've been working with?
I mean, pivoting is just, it's at this point, it's not the right word, because the amount of
we're like spinning tops.
Yeah, you're spinning tops. But yeah, I mean, redundant supply chains and just making sure where stuff is coming from. And if that means, pulling in imports, as long as they have the same certifications, that's the point of, these certifications being able to be used across borders, right? And we're hoping that the USDA figures out its fraud program. They've got a whole new process to prevent organic fraud as well. But I think making sure that you're in touch with your suppliers. For those those folks that you're buying from directly, now's the time to ask them: are you treating your farm workers well? Do they have PPE? Are they being paid a minimum or living wage, right? And that's not mandated in this country. Farm workers are treated very poorly. They're not protected by most of the labor protections. New York State just is allowing farm workers to get overtime, right? That's not a federal law. All the New Deal labor protections don't apply to farm workers. So now's the time to be asking your farmers, your farm owners, what they're doing, especially in terms of preventing COVID spreads. As COVID spread in the supply chain, when you look at meat and food processing, over 70,000 infections at least. That's the ones that have been counted, and over 300 deaths in the food supply chain. So you, as a retailer, how do you leverage the power of the purchase order, your ability to buy from folks and give them business, give them income, and use that power to say, are you doing right in your supply chain? Are you doing right by your employees? Are you doing right by your farmers, the folks that you buy from? Now's the time to be checking in on those. And that's stuff that I've been working with on a couple of folks I work with. And it's hard questions because they're not used to being asked that. Most people aren't used to being asked that. And they're more thinking of, those are expenses. But we have to think of those. We have to think of those folks in the supply chain as not only assets, but people, people with rights, people with dreams, people with health problems. People don't always have access to the types of foods that here we're talking about that we're selling. Yet are being treated as expendable. And it's a horrific tragedy what has happened in the supply chain, especially around bigger food, bigger meat plants and processing. And it's something that I think, those of us in the food industry who have this privilege or have a platform have to speak out and take action to correct. And, not only in our supply chains, but obviously at the policy level as well, and strengthening OSHA, strengthening, protections for those farm workers, and moving to a place where, like, not only are you paying farmers enough to sustain their business, price parity, but we are pushing farm owners to make sure they're taking care of the people that work for them. There's some great organizations out there doing that, like Migrant Justice in Vermont, or Coalition of Immokalee Workers Fair Food Program, which is now actually moving into Texas from Florida as well. So I know I sort of went off topic, but these are the types of things that I thought a lot about when I was at the helm at Whole Foods, and then I still work on with a number of the
Well, and this is what I've admired about you, Errol. You've worked with brands in a fair and equitable way and helped them grow in your time there. You got to the top, and here you are really representing, in a sense, or advocating for labor and justice in labor and workers. And that may also lead a little bit to some of your goals with the Checkout, your podcast. So I think it's a really interesting approach that you're taking, where you're really advocating for the essential workers as well as helping brands succeed in the marketplace.
Yeah, why does innovation and having ethical foundation have to be like two separate things? You know, I mean, I consider myself an entrepreneur, but I'm also an activist. I believe strongly in social justice and Tikkun Olam, you know, repair and tzedek, justice. You know, these are things you grow up learning as a Jewish person. But I love new product development. I love brand management. I love, you know, developing new supply chains. You know, all that stuff is like, it's fun, it's interesting, but why do they have to be mutually exclusive, right? You know, why does social justice work have to be seen as like boring and, you know, dogmatic? You know, to me, they're one and the same. And I believe that everyone does better when everyone does better.
Ethical
and
brands
that everyone should have
their
access
workers,
to good food.
right?
Yeah, and I believe that, you know, the natural products industry is uniquely positioned in our society to make a huge difference in the livelihoods of the folks in the supply chain that make all this amazing stuff that we're used to selling, right? It's pretty simple to me. And the podcast is just essentially a window into my soul. It's like, that's the stuff I read on the weekends and the folks that I talk to, I'm interested in. I've got some great interviews coming with brand owners, some CEOs that I admire who do some really cool things. Like I love ice cream, so I'm talking to my favorite ice cream company, and we'll release that episode soon. The next episode we're doing is with a Native American chef who's an amazing chef. You know, what he's been doing to, you know, revive indigenous culinary traditions, and you could see the other stuff. You know, the folks I'm talking to who, you know, to me it's multifaceted. It's a complex discussion that we need to have, but it needs to be rooted in justice, and it needs to be, for me, rooted in innovation too. So I think that's where we're coming from. And luckily I found a great partner in my friend Evan Driscoll. He used to do the podcast for National Young Farmers Coalition, and he's really designed a lot of the aesthetics and the sound and the intro music he found. So, I mean, he's 50-50 with me and behind the scenes. Even though I'm the introvert, I'm the one who has to do all the people stuff. And
you're not being so introverted today. You're
behind the screen.
What you're talking about is fantastic. So what I want to let people know is, you know, we're getting close to the top of the hour here. If you've got some questions, pop them in the chat room. I know Bill will field some of those. Also, check out thecheckoutadio.com, right?
Yeah, thecheckoutadio.com. And it's fun. And we've got about 25 episodes docked up. So we're going to continue to release content. It's a labor of love. We don't have any sponsors at this point. We're just sort of doing it out of our own pockets. And we'll see how it goes, if folks are listening to it, or, you know, we don't get a lot of folks reaching out. Occasionally we get folks either complaining or mostly supportive. We got a lot of great supportive notes, but if folks have guests or topics they want us to cover, we're open. And, you know, I'm a nerd. I mean, anything that you see out there, when we interview somebody, I've read their book, I've read their articles, I've done my background so that I don't sound like an idiot when I'm asking them questions, and I'm not wasting their time. So, you know, we're putting work into it too. And, you know, the fact that it's, as far as I know, the only podcast like this that's done by folks who are active on a full-time basis in the food industry. So it's from the inside out, you know, and so we're coming at it from like, hey, we're essential workers too. We're food workers, you know, we're food system activists too. And so those conversations, I think, are that much more vital and interesting because of that.
No, and all the folks, you know, out there, I think, you know, again, audience, check out thecheckoutadio.com. Bill, I want to turn it to you to help us kind of wrap up here. See if you have some questions you might want to throw out to wind it up.
Yeah, I would probably leave you with one question, Errol, before we go ahead and select our winner of our cool gift basket today. And that is there any sort of life lesson you've taken away from this past year of the pandemic that you can share with people for your tips for sort of staying sane, keeping busy, and doing good work?
Yeah, I mean, this pandemic comes on the heels of us being displaced from our house for 2 years due to mold and flooding, you know, climate related stuff, on the heels of my wife's battle with cancer, which she survived. on the heels of losing my job from Whole Foods. So I think right now it's just self-care, you know. One of my favorite books is Abraham Hessel's The Sabbath. Heschel was a rabbi who was good friends with MLK, and I'm agnostic. I'm not religious, but for me, understanding, you know, from a spiritual sense of, you know, take a break, take a little time off. You got to take care of yourself. This is a temple too. You know, this needs to be sacred. You're not going to survive this if you're abusing that, and you know you're not taking the time out for yourself. And I also want to emphasize the need for cooperation and mutual aid. You know, beyond, you know, the retail cooperatives and, you know, business service cooperatives that my friends work on, just working as a cooperator, you know, in your community and making sure that you're supported, you're being supportive, you know, that there's, you know, a level of give and take. We're not going to get through this as little atomized individuals running around burning ourselves out. You know, we got to support each other, and we got to take care of each other as much as possible, especially there's so many folks that we need to take care of and help out, that don't have the resources or privileges that many of us on this call do. So that's, I think, my biggest takeaway from not only the pandemic, but these last few years of roller coaster craziness. So,
yeah. Well, that's really well said. And boy, I think you've been through a lot. So
I'm glad to hear that your wife is doing well.
Okay.
She kicks ass. Yeah, she's a midwife, and she takes care of everybody, and we're trying to get her, make sure we take care of her and she takes care of herself. But she's my biggest inspiration and influence in all this.
Super cool. Thank you.
I love you, honey.
Yeah.
I hope she's on for her to hear that.
She's not.
Errol, you're an inspiration to us, man. Thank you so much for your work out there.
Good to talk. Listen, I'm going to go ahead and select our winner today, and that is Lisa Prang. It's Prange. Lisa's in the queue over here on my right. Evan from our team. Evan, if you would make note of Lisa and get in touch with her after, we'll send this amazing gift basket we have from Allegro, and it has all kinds of cool stuff in it, like coffee, tea, and some coffee mugs, and probably some other things that I'm not aware of. But
Lisa lucked out for the bonus holiday gift basket. That's awesome.
A special gift basket. And with that,
you guys are such sweethearts. I love this vibe. Thank you so much for doing this. I just need to say that.
Man. And I'll leave Steve with our last word. I just want to thank you for coming on and really appreciate the work you're doing, man.
My pleasure.
Steve, I'll leave you with the last word.
Folks, thank you very much for joining us. As Bill said earlier, we're going to take December off, but you'll be hearing an announcement for us. We're very excited about the program schedule coming in the first quarter 2021, and stay tuned. You'll hear more about it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day today. Have a safe, wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Lots of love to you all. All right.
Take care.
Bye now.